whites and the Muslims, etc., etc. You know, or I don't know. I think he's full of hatred and just ill-educated. He should have come to my classes back in the 1990s. People like that, and I have taught people like Tommy Robinson.
I'd say that you hit the nail on the head. I think that's a common factor for most of those right group. They are
lack of education.
Lack of education. Lack of view.
Yeah, they have not been taught that it's okay to see the connectedness of all the faiths and races, and you know and that is a failing of the education system. We're not teaching enough philosophy and enough of that breadth of mind when they're teenagers, which is when they need it. Which is why I was so pleased to spend 10 years as a school teacher. And then I want to also finish by saying that the death of this American, Charlie Kirk, is another thing that's happened this week. And I just want to reflect on, you know, the tragedy of that. But also, I mean, he was young, he was in his 30s, but he'd spent his life as a sort of Tommy Robinson in America. He'd been demonizing what he calls the left, which is a sort of figment of their imagination, and he had created a whole sort of movement, 2 million followers on YouTube, blaming Biden for stealing the election, promoting Trump, promoting this displacement theory that the whites are being forced out of America deliberately because elites are bringing in people from, Hispanic origin or Arabic or whatever. So again, somebody that just really didn't have the intellectual wherewithal to understand the need for love, for affirming our difference and yet our interconnectedness in spite of that. Again, I love New York precisely because of its multiculturalism. I've been in most major American cities and I've always loved that about it. And I've always felt, you know, free and at peace walking around the streets. Now, it must be a nightmare because you've got Elon Musk's ICE troops, you know, going around arresting people if you're the wrong colour or you're not a, you know, or you're some kind of alien. It's unleashed this horrendous racial hatred on the streets of America, which I don't recognise. And this chap, Charlie Kirk, was one of the leaders of that. Now, I think what's interesting, and I've read reports to this effect, I suspend judgment, is that he was just beginning to question the Palestinian genocide in Gaza. He was just making, in his speeches, he was saying, because up until then he'd been very pro-Zionist, very pro-Israeli. But he was just beginning to say, maybe actually that's wrong. Maybe they shouldn't be massacring Palestinians. And soon after that, he's assassinated. It does seem strange, and I think some inquiry needs to be done. I mean, they found a 22-year-old boy they arrested who had, you know, evidence that he'd been involved in it. And he's from an extreme right-wing perspective himself.
His whole family, and also where he lives, mother, father, they are deeply right MAGA supporters.
Right, so this is an irony that the guy that kills this bloke is himself an extreme MAGA supporter.
He refuses to be questioned.
He's refused to be questioned.
He is questioned, but he refused to answer.
Yeah, so, you know, this is a quirk of this right to silence in the American legal system. I think one has a duty of speech and to explain what you've done. But anyway, so my take on this as a philosopher is that if you spend your life based on hate speech and demonizing the other, and that's what you make your living doing, which is what he's been doing, eventually it turns back and bites you. You know, and by the way, his stuff has been fact-checked. 90% of what this guy Charlie Kirk used to say is false. He would make up stuff, like all these MAGA theories, they're fake. 90% of them were fact-checked to be wrong. Now, if you make a career telling lies, which is what he was doing, you're creating a very unsteady foundation for your life, and you may attract people that like to hear lies, and that are attracted to that. But ultimately, it's going to bounce back, and that I think is what happened karmically. If I'm trying to put my Jane hat on and analyse non-violently what goes on when people promote violence, is they often get violence done to them in return. So whilst it's obviously a micro tragedy, it's also a kind of macro working out of karma, I would say. And that's why I come back finally to my book, which Sophie did her essay on. We should be finding paths to non-violence as a culture, not violence. And the other thing I just want to mention briefly is that Elon Musk, in his speech to the Tommy Robinson, jamboree, quoted George Orwell. He was wearing a T-shirt saying, a quote from Orwell. And I'm actually reading a biography of George Orwell at the moment. It was interesting that Elon Musk, I think there's a few brain cells of conscience there, because he said in his talks, I'm appealing to the moderates of this country, the people of common sense, the people of the centre. Well, okay, I'm a Liberal Democrat, head of the Philosophy Forum. I represent that centre, and I'm afraid, Elon Musk, you don't speak for me. And you're using Orwell to pretend that you have some ethics, but what you did with Doge is completely wrong. And I think Orwell would himself be absolutely appalled at what has happened in America under your watch and under Trump's watch, who you enabled. And if, God forbid, Farage and Tommy Robinson get power in Britain, you will have blood on your hands, ultimately. And George Orwell will be turning in his grave. So I'll talk more about Orwell later. I'm halfway through the biography. But I just want to flag up that T-shirt of yours is not acceptable, Mr. Musk. Take it off. You don't deserve to wear it. And also, just to say that George Orwell's wife, Eileen, during the war worked for the British Ministry of Information, which is based in Senate House in Bloomsbury, which is where I did a lot of my studies as an undergraduate, and then it's where my Viva took place for my PhD in the intellectual history of the Cold War and the search for peace from 1945 to 2001. So that building was commandeered by the government to run a Ministry of Information, basically providing propaganda against Nazism and fascism during World War II. And Orwell's wife worked for them, so she would come home at night and share stuff. And some of 1984 was set there in Orwell's great later novel. But what I always argued when I worked for the University of London to create an Institute of Peace Studies, I said, why is it only when there's a war that intellectuals come together to create, a counter-resistance to evil and falsity? What we need is an Institute of Peace Studies that is operating all the time, bringing in the best minds of the country to find and figure out ways to peace, genuinely, both in Britain and worldwide. So, I still would like a floor of Senate House, please, for the Institute of Peace Studies. And we can have Orwell's ghost there as a assistant professor. Right, okay, I'm going to stop there. That's a little roundup of the week's events. Any questions or comments from people?
Not yet.
Not yet. Are you enjoying the tea?
Hi, yes.
Excellent. From you, Jan?
No, it's just the stuff that goes on in Gaza and the Middle East, whilst the Arab leaders are meeting in Doha. Mark Rubio flew from Washington to Jerusalem and for a meeting with Bibi Netanyahu, whilst they were still bombing, while he was there talking to them, to the Israeli government, who were killing another 20, 30 Palestinians, children in Gaza. It's a disaster.
Yeah. I mean, I think we have to objectively see what's been going on and recognise that the American establishment under Trump is quite anti-Islamic. Let's put it rationally. And they see Islam as a dangerous threat.
Yeah.
And so for them, killing Palestinians is acceptable. It's just what you have to do. Now, I dispute that idea. I think it's a false idea. I think that being anti-Muslim is not an acceptable position to be in because they are nearly 2 billion people. They're one of the world's biggest religions after Christianity. And the vast majority of Muslims and their intellectual history is one of seeking peace. That's what Islam means. When I taught at Muslim college, I never had an anti-Islamic thought. My view is that we should work with the great contemporary Islamic leaders, and they should be talking with their people to get truth, justice, peace prioritised. I wanted a peace institute in Medina, I still do, an Islamic Peace Studies Institute in Medina where the great minds of the Islamic world can go and discuss peace. That is the 100% duty of Muslims everywhere. And rather than bombing Muslims, we should be helping fund such think tanks, educational institutes. And that would be my strategy. So I think people like Rubio have swallowed the Israeli "we will hate Muslims" line as if it's theirs. But it shouldn't be. It's not just to put it in real politic terms, it's not in the interest of the American people or the British to adopt this anti-Islamic rhetoric.
I would say it's a total lack of ecumenic education in the American educational system.
Well, one of my complaints against the American education school system is there's no religious studies. They don't learn about what is Islam, they don't learn about what is Christianity or what is Judaism and how they all interlink, or what is Hinduism or Sikhism. There's no knowledge, but in the British education system we have it. And that's why on the whole British people are more educated. And they're trying to import, with people like Tommy Robinson and Elon Musk, that level of ignorance. They won't pass, as far as I can say. Thank God in Europe we have a more sophisticated history of interactions. But no, good point. The other thing to say, and it's a point made in meetings I've chaired and stuff, that the Palestinians are also a lot of Christians. A lot of the people dying in Gaza are actually Christian Arabs, which is an ancient lineage going back to the times of Christ. Christ himself was a Aramaic speaking from Palestine, Jewish-ish, but interested in the wider implications of the biblical tradition and interested in the oral traditions of that whole region, and probably studied in Egypt. He was a bigger thinker. And Christianity, there's thousands of Christians also being bombed in Gaza. Now, does Rubio and Trump and the American hardcore people that flock to Netanyahu, do they know this? Because a lot of them profess to be Christians.
That's what they claim to be Christians. Very same this Chris guy that was
the guy that was just assassinated.
Yeah, he claims also to.
Yeah, he claimed to be a Christian nationalist, whatever that means.
Yeah, very Christian, very religious, and his wife is spreading, trying to pick up the slack after he's departed, and trying to spread the same sort of hatred. But
well,
she only spreads hatred, though.
I don't recognise that as Christianity. I mean, there's nothing in the Christian Bible or the teachings of the church or the tradition that I'm familiar with that would recognise this stuff as as Christianity.
You should love thy neighbour.
Well, precisely, love your neighbour, and work for the kingdom of God on this plane of being.
That's why we moved down here.
Yeah,
some of my friendly neighbours there.
Yeah. We're supposed to love our neighbours, yes, and not to seek to destroy and kill them. So I think there's some theological deep reflection needed on the part of the American and the British soul as to whether we're going to accept this very narrow, kind of it's a form. I mean, I think technically it's called Christian Zionism, which has done a weird mental gymnastics so that suddenly the extreme Zionists like Netanyahu and his cronies are closer friends and allies of Americans and British than Christians in the Middle East. Like, you know, that just doesn't logically add up, which is why I've just written this book on the logic of peace. I'm trying to expose the illogicality of war. And the great philosophers, I think, of both Christian, Jewish and Islamic intellectual heritage would agree that this is a category error that's being made by these people. So we should call them out. Yeah, thanks for those comments. Right, shall we move to our periodic table? I think there's a couple lurking here. You keep that one.
Okay.
And I'm going to find the other ones. There's another couple somewhere. Bear with me.
Here. There they are.
Okay, great. Thank you, one each. Super. Okay, let's go through and choose one of these each and improve the quotient of our knowledge of different philosophies and religions. That's the point of developing this as a pedagogical tool. It should be in every American and British school on the humanities department wall in its big form. Yes.
Did you have box 85 Islamic truths?
No, we haven't had that, at least not for a while, so that's a good one. We'll have that one. Yeah. Yes. Jan, which one are you going to choose?
I was looking at 87 Islamic Gnostic, but I'm not sure if he's doing one of the Islams. I can probably find something else.
Okay. You can always close your eye and use the finger. They're all interesting.
Hindu.
Which one?
66 Tantric, is it?
Okay. Yeah, that's good. Right. Okay. Let's do the Druze. Well, no. Let's do the Hindu Tantric one because that's sort of chronologically earlier. I tried to do them in sequence. Tantra is a fascinating tradition. It's an oral tradition in both Buddhism and Hinduism. And
Are we talking about tantrums here?
No.
What are that?
Not tantrums. Tantra. The word is interesting. It's a Sanskrit term which means, tan means things that are extended in time and space. And tra is to transcend. The etymology of this Sanskrit term means going beyond the extension of visible reality. So everything we see has extension, time and space. Things, the 10,000 things. But we have to learn to transcend that and find the source of them all, where they come from. And that is regarded by Tantra as the abode of the gods, the abode of cosmic consciousness. We come from the spiritual kingdoms, we come into human form, and Tantra is a path of spiritual learning that can get us back in touch with our source point, where we come in. And it has many famous teachers over the centuries. It's associated particularly with the deity Shiva, who is regarded as the god of tantrics, and who focuses on transformation and yoga. So yoga is the sort of first school for studying Tantra. There are different forms of yoga. There's the physical hatha yoga, but there's also breath yoga, pranayama, and then there's mind yoga, which is jnana yoga, which is the kind I work with mostly, although I've done the others. Shiva has a consort, Durga, Parvati, and Tantra accepts that sexuality is part of life's sacred covenant. We should all have a partner to practice love with and affection and sexuality. And it teaches certain, like a sacred form of lovemaking that is not just about immediate satisfaction, but rather about using our physical vehicles to achieve that transcendence, actually through sexuality. And one of the famous teachers of this was Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh, who was around in the 70s, 80s, took the name Osho. He's written many books on tantric secrets, because he wanted his disciples not to be celibate, but to explore esoteric sexuality. And on the whole, that's what tantric teachers do. There are, many around. They say that life is for lila, for joy, for a pleasure is not a sin. It's to explore, but with a sacred mentality. And it's interesting, I've just been reading this biography of Maimonides, the great Jewish intellectual, and he says the same. He says, no, the Jew shouldn't be against physicality, against sexuality. Have the odd glass of wine, enjoy pleasure, because that is part of God's gift to us as humans. We shouldn't be striving through self-harm, fasting too much, to transcend the body. The body is not a crime. The body is a gift of our parents to enjoy, to use as a vehicle for the onward enlightenment of ourselves and everyone else. So it's a profound thing. It was then taken by Buddha's teachings, because Buddha himself was brought up in a Hindu context in the town of Kapilavastu in North India, and he learned all this stuff. So in the Buddhist tantric tradition, which is another box, it's number 26, so I'm not going to go into enormous detail, but they took the Hindu tantric teachings and gave them a Buddhist kind of, coloration. But it's ultimately the same thing. And it's about, there's subtle differences between the Hindu and the Buddhist tantric systems. But I'm not going to go into that in too much detail, except to say that in the Hindu tradition, the point isn't to reach the void. The point is to reach enlightenment, nirvana, and then remain a householder, a husband, a wife, a mother, a father, and to bring the wisdom of the void into one's actions. It's a bit like the Socratic tradition in Greek philosophy. Socrates attained enlightenment, wisdom, but he didn't leave Athens. He still carried on teaching in the streets of Athens. And he had a wife and, enjoyed the odd glass of wine. Because it's bringing that wisdom into the marketplace. That's the duty of the tantric. So, anyway, and it's got links to Druidry, because in a sense Celtic Druidry is the Celtic equivalent of Tantra. And I've, written about that and spoken about it. Yes, and it's equally important for men and women. So there are great women tantric teachers and male, and ultimately we're both male and female anyway. We have qualities, characteristics. The first little time in the womb, we're both genders, and it's only a bit later we separate and become one or the other. But God consciousness is both, transcending those bifurcations. So anyway, that's Tantra. Fascinating stuff. Any questions about that?
Something related. Oh, I simply forgot about the Buddhist part. The Tantra. I was surprised to see that. Oh, you also have.
Yes. Yeah, no, they are closely interlinked. Maybe we could do the Buddhist one next week or something, and I'll go into more detail on that. Okay, shall we do the Druze now? And that was your choice, wasn't it?
Hi.
I believe. So, yes, number 85, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay. It's an offshoot of more conventional kind of Islamic thought. One of the interesting things about Islam is it's given birth to different varieties. To use a not altogether brilliant metaphor, you could say there's the thing called cakes, And then there's varieties of cakes. There's chocolate cakes, strawberry cakes, etc. And that's one of the beauties of Islam. It's not a monolithic thing. There isn't just one kind of Islam. There are many, and one of them is called the Druze tradition. They have a particular lineage. Within Islam, you revere a lineage coming from the Prophet Muhammad, who brought the latest revelation, as they see it, to humanity in the 600s in the form of the Quran, and they all study the Quran. But depending on how you interpret the Quran, what is the nuance of hermeneutic you apply, you can position yourself in these different lineages. In the Druze tradition, they believe in the lineage of wisdom was handed down from Muhammad to his son-in-law Ali and to his daughter Fatima, who was Ali's wife. And it's an undoubted fact that Ali was there when most of the surahs of the Quran were received, and he knew their inner meaning because Muhammad talked to him about them. They were family. And we know that before he died, Ali was trying to do a chronological commentary on the Quran. He was trying to put the Quran into its chronological order because he knew the order. In the official Quran, they're not in chronological order. They're by order of length. And Ali said, fine. That was the custom in Jewish books at the time. You would have commentaries by the sages in order of length. But Ali said, that's a bit bonkers if you really want to understand the Quran and where it came from and why that surah happened then and there. And I was there, I know what happened, he would say. So you've got to have it in chronological sequence. Unfortunately, he died. He was killed by ignorant people that, conspired to kill him before he finished that book. And it went into hiding, and we don't know where that book is, whether it still survives or not. I went to a talk online by a professor. There's a unit at Harvard University that's studying the Ali tradition. And this guy has written a biography of Ali. And I asked him, did you find the book? Where is it? And he said, well, no, we don't know where it's gone. It could be hiding in some cave in some remote, Islamic shrine. But what I did in my commentary on the Quran is I tried to complete that work. And my commentary on the Quran is in chronological sequence.
Oh, it is. So they know after all.
Yeah. I mean, scholars have worked out what the chronological sequence is. So I used that and did my 10-year project of a commentary on the chronological sequence. And I think Ali would have been pleased. And I think the Druze would be pleased. So they respect Ali, they respect the 12 Imams that came from Ali, descendants of Ali and Fatima. These were great sages. They respect the caliphs, and they respect the, particularly the sixth caliph of the Fatimid dynasty of Egypt. It was called Al-Hakim bi Amr Allah. Hakim means the wise one, and the Fatimid dynasty of Egypt were sort of Gnostic Muslims, we could call them. They were Ismailis, which is another branch, and that is number 82. And they founded the Al-Azhar University in Cairo. They were highly intellectual Muslims. And the Druze are named after Muhammad ad-Darazi, who carried this tradition forward. And it was believed that he gave these precepts inspired by the Fatimid ruler Al-Hakim bi Amr Ali as an update. So the point is that, yes, there's the Quran, there's the manifestation of God's prophecies for mankind, but how can that affect us now in 10th century Egypt, which is when this was happening? And it's thought that in 1015 AD, this chap, Muhammad ad-Darazi, announced himself as the latest revealer of the revelation. So there are these revelations coming through the Quran, but then you need to interpret them properly. And he said, no, I've received from God the proper interpretation of the Quran. Listen to what I'm saying. And his followers became known as the Druze, the Al-Darazi people. and he disappeared. I don't think we know where he's buried. They believe that he was returned to God. And the followers, the Druze, are scattered in Syria, Lebanon, and in the north of Israel. There's not that many. They've been going ever since, and the number is thought to be, is given there in the box. Probably about 500,000 alive now, and then in the whole of history, probably, 50 million. I mean, it's not an insignificant aspect of Islam. They have books. There's a book called the Copy of the Secret by Hamza bin Ali, which is guarded by the Druze. If you were to go to a Druze village in Lebanon or Syria or Israel and say, "Hi, I'm studying religious studies, can I see your book?" They wouldn't immediately reveal it. You have to prove that you're a worthy recipient. But some scholars have gone, and we know its contents. And its contents are very interesting because it's very interfaith. The Druze believe that there have been many, many sequences of revelations in history, that all these boxes are sacred revealers. God is in charge of the whole process. They believe in reincarnation, so somebody that was a tantric sage in the 6th century BC in India might well reincarnate as a Druze, in 12th century Egypt or something. The wisdom is the same. Whatever the colour of your body or your language, it's the same wisdom. They believe in reincarnation, so as do most of the people of wisdom on the planet, and as Plato did. And they revere them all. They say they're all they're all doing the same thing. But Muhammad has a special mission for humanity, which is the surrendering of ego, the finding of God as divine love. They believe Jesus, as did Muhammad, was a prophet. They love Christians, the Druze. There's no way they would bomb them as the so-called Christians of America are doing in Palestine. There's probably Druze, who've been in Palestine over the centuries. They practice prayer. They believe in the importance of justice. And that the divine reason, the Logos, took form in Al-Hakim of the Fatimid dynasty in Egypt. They also say that if you're being persecuted and tortured to death, and they're saying, "Are you a Druze? Are you a Druze? We're going to kill you," you have the duty of dissimulation for survival. This is called taqiyya. So it's kind of common sense, really. You don't have to be a martyr and die, because that's not what God wants. If you're a person of wisdom and you understand the inner esoteric truth of, say, the Quran, it's not important. You shouldn't die. You should keep that wisdom alive. So if some fundamentalist Muslim comes, like an ISIS chap, and says, "I'm going to shoot you, you're one of those Gnostic, heretical Islams, aren't you, one of those Druze," you say, "Oh, no, I'm a good Sunni. Just go to the next village." Because that way you survive and your wisdom isn't crucified. That's common sense, I think. They also believe that there have been successive manifestations of the absolute wisdom incarnated in human form. And only one of those forms is their founder, Al-Hakim. So I love studying the history of religions because it's much wiser than we thought. What's not to like about this? A lot of them now live in southern Lebanon, in southwest Syria, northern Israel, and sadly that's a part of the world that is full of torment